What's up, guys? In this tutorial we're going to cover how to go from design to development in Webflow. So we'll be we'll be developing this page for a church in Webflow, and let's just jump right in. So the first thing we need to do is really just look at the design, and as we're looking at this design, my first step that I like to do is drag out some rulers and just kind of see where everything lines up. So if I add one right here and maybe right here, I can see that this box is aligning with the items in the footer, with the ends of the content, start and ends of content. It's aligning with pretty much everything except the nav. The nav's the only thing that's breaking outside of this sort of section. And then let's go ahead and drop one in right here and see. So these two are aligning with each other, and that's about 50% of the screen. So right in the middle, we have sort of a split. And let's do two more. Let's look at these items. So it looks like these items are aligning with each other as well in a 3-column sort of grid. So once we know that, we kind of get a better idea for what kind of grid we're going to need and how we're going to need to set things up. The next step is really just to export all of the assets that we'll need. So I'm looking for any pictures like these should be JPEG files just because they load a little quicker. But anything like this that's a vector, it's best to use SVGs because it scales on really large screens. It's still super clear and it loads so much faster. I'm in XD right now, but any design program you use, if you export the whatever file, export it as an SVG, and that's just going to be a vector, a clean file. We'll call that one logo, and we'll look for any other files. All these will just be things we can create, these images. This will just be an embed, like a video embed from YouTube or something. So, and maybe we'll just need a few social icons. So these are pretty clean, pretty minimal. So we'll call this one Facebook. And I'm just exporting each one of these. YouTube. Alright, so that's all of the icons that we have, and I believe we're ready to jump right in. So we'll jump over into Webflow. So when I'm creating all my projects, I like to think of responsiveness, and what I mean by that is a lot of sites nowadays, when you open one up, they'll look something like this. They'll look pretty good. They'll have a font size, and if you look at that font size, it'll be set to something like 60 pixels or a pixel value, and it looks fine. But once you start to look at larger screens, like say we look at a 2000 pixel screen, the font size are a lot smaller, and the font size didn't actually change. It's just the screen is so large and the content didn't actually get any bigger. And then if we step it up to even larger screens, it can look super tiny and things just start to get lost. So this is the most common way of development, is just to use pixels for most things, but there is a better way to do it, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. So kind of a better way to start developing things is to use viewport width. And what that means is that's just a percentage of your screen size. So as your screen sort of shrinks and grows to different sizes, what you'll notice is that the text and the buttons and the images and everything inside of it sort of scales proportionately. So everything is growing with the width of your screen. And that's really the way we want things to grow in an ideal world. So if I switch this one over to 2000 pixels, for instance, you'll see the text size didn't actually change, or we can even go up to 5000. It looks exactly the same on a smaller screen as it does on a much larger screen, which is really good. That's what we want. So I'll show you how to do that. And to make this a little bit easier, I created a project that you can definitely clone. I'll include the link in the description of this YouTube video. But this project basically removes all the unnecessary styles that Webflow has when you get started. From everything from like paddings and margins on the tops of font sizes. And it sets your project up to be really scalable and work really well. So we're just going to start this project off by cloning, and we'll create a new project from this clone, and I'll just call it YouTube tutorial, and we'll create the project. So this is basically where we're starting off, and we start off with a couple neat things. We have a symbol here for just some global styles, which we'll worry about that later. And then we have all of our font sizes, all of our headings from H1 all the way down to H6, and our paragraph font sizes as well. Rich text, it's all in here. So that's really nice. And basically what I'm going to do is start inputting some things into Webflow that we're going to need. Like we know for sure we're going to need a specific font. This font is called DM Sans. It's a free Google font. So I'll just go over to, if I go to project settings up at the top in Webflow, and then we go to the fonts tab over here, we can select from a list of Google fonts that are available. And I'll start with this DM Sans, and then we can select the weights that we want to add, and I'll just add the regular medium and bold for now. And then that's how we add a font to our project so we can start using it. So now I'm just going to jump right back into the designer view. If I click the designer, and we're right back into the designer view. So for now, this styles panel that has all my font sizes and everything, I'm just going to hide that to get it out of the way. So I'll set it from display block over here to display none, and that just kind of removes it from the document flow for now. So I'll select the body and click on the plus sign right here and click on the body all pages tag. So otherwise you would just be affecting this one page, but if you click on body all pages, it's going to style every single page on the website for you, which is what we want. So from here I can change the font, and that means any text that I drop into this body is going to be using this particular font here, which is what we want. So I'm going to switch it to DM Sans. We'll start with normal. Let's see, we want the background color of the body to be this really dark, almost black color that we see kind of here in the background. So I'm just going to grab that color real quick, and I'll add that to the background here. And then it's important that you save these kind of like swatches. So if you hit this plus sign, and I'll name it black, and hit create, that way it's saved in Webflow. I can use it later in other places. And also if I hit edit and change it here, it's going to change every instance of this across the whole site that's using that color. So it's really important to create these as swatches. So from there I'll also set the font color under typography to be more like white, and I'll create that swatch and call it white. And so now I have two colors in here, and one set to be my font color and one set to be my background color. The next thing that I like to do is just go ahead and add in all your colors. So we'll go to this dark gray, for instance. And we'll add that one in, and we'll call it dark gray. We'll add this regular gray in as well. This font color, which is more of a light gray. And last, this blue color as well. All right, so we have all our colors in, we have our fonts in, and that's really the biggest step to get started. I'll change my background color here back to this black color. So that is everything we need to really get started on this. I'm going to, first of all, just kind of jump back into the design. And let's see, basically every element on the page is made up of sections. So we can say this top section here is our first section. And then this section here contains a couple images. This third section contains text and video. The next section contains some columns of text, another image and text, and then, so you get the point. They're all various sections. And all of these sections really have the same padding on the inside of them, so the same amount of space between elements for the most part. So what I'm going to do is set up a class. I'm going to drop in a div under this plus sign and drop in a div block. And we basically want to use divs for pretty much everything. And we'll drop in a div and we'll call it section is the name of it. So from here, we will need to give it some sort of property, some sort of padding, because if I were to drag in a title, let me just drag in a title into this section right there, you'll see that the title is all the way up against the end of the page, and we don't want that. We want some sort of padding inside this section. So I'm going to click on the section, and I'm going to type 10 VW and hit enter for the padding right here. And then also for the padding on the other side, 10 VW and hit enter. And what the VW is it stands for viewport width. So it's going to scale, it's going to decrease and increase as the height of your browser, as the width of your browser increases and decreases. Whereas if I were to have just typed in 80 pixels here, for instance, you'll see that the text, this 80 pixels never changes. Even on a really small screen, it's still 80 pixels regardless. Whereas this 10 viewport width is really just 10% of the width of the screen. So as the screen size gets smaller, this viewport width is also getting smaller. So by using this viewport width, you're automatically making your sort of font sizes and your paddings and everything very responsive already. And with this project we cloned, the viewport width is set for the font size. So all fonts in here are viewport width based. So they're scaling with the height, with the width of the browser. As the browser gets wider, the font sizes are also getting taller. So it's growing seamlessly, which is exactly what we want. Now, what I like to do for the top and bottom padding of the sections, because you obviously want some space on top and bottom, is I like to use something called EMs instead. So I'll start these off at 3 EM top padding and 3 EM bottom padding. And the reason why I like to do that is EM is a percentage as well. EM is a percentage of the body font size. So we'll see the body font size right now, all text in the body, is set to 1 viewport width. So right now, by setting this section top padding to EM, it's a viewport width of, it's a percentage, it's 3% of, or 30, sorry, it's 3 times of 1 viewport width. So it's 3 viewport width essentially right now. But we don't want the font size to stay viewport width. As it gets smaller and smaller, it starts to get too small. It starts to get hard to read. So on tablet right here, this is usually where I switch the body to a pixel font size instead. So I'll hit this plus sign up here. And then this is the font size of your paragraph text. So what's the smallest you would ever want your font size to be? And good practice is never go any smaller than 16 pixels for body copy, because any smaller than that, it kind of gets hard to read. So 16 pixels is a good place to start. So on this tablet breakpoint, with the body all pages tag selected, I'll type in 16 pixels for the font size. And you'll see now it's a pixel base, so this font size isn't actually getting any smaller whatsoever as my browser size gets smaller. On here, it's growing, it's scaling proportionately with the size of the window. So larger sizes, it's pretty large and it gets smaller and smaller, and then here it switches to pixels. So now because this is EM, this essentially is pixels, top and bottom, and then the viewports on the sides are percentages of the screen width. So as this gets smaller, the spaces on the sides are getting less and less, but the space on the top and bottom isn't shrinking at all. It's just essentially a pixel base because it's a percentage of the body font size. So all that to say, basically make your paddings on the side and viewport width, make your paddings on the top and bottom EM, and then your font sizes will be viewport width here, and they'll switch to pixels on tablet view. And that's really a great place to start with making everything responsive. So we have this section. My next step is really just to kind of start scaling, setting all my font sizes. So if I open up back this C style, set it to display block for a second, we'll see I have my heading in here. I have all these different heading sizes, and I can set these. So if I come back and look at the design some, this one here is probably going to be my H1 because it's the largest heading on the page, and it's also what I want Google to read as the most important. So I'm just going to paste in some of this H1 text right in here. And then this is my paragraph font size. So paragraph size right now is 22 pixels in this design. So I want my paragraph font size to be about 22 pixels and then 38 pixels line height. So paragraph font size is being directly inherited, if we click on this, from the body all pages tag. So if I go to my layers, I click on the body, I go to the all pages tag, and then kind of I can increase this font size. So maybe instead of 1 viewport width, it's 1.2 viewport width or 1.4 viewport width. And I'm just going to publish this project real quick, and I'll kind of open it in a new tab so I can see what it's looking like. So right now I'm just trying to figure out how many pixels this is, and I use this extension. It's a Google Chrome extension called What Font, and it'll tell you what font the site's using, but if you click on it, it'll also tell you the font size as well. And I can see this is about 19 pixels, so it's a little bit smaller than what I want it to be compared to this, which is 22, and that's 19. So I may make it a little bit larger. I'm not too worried about this being exactly like the design in this case, but definitely feel free to fine-tune it if you'd like. So I'm just going to increase the font size a little bit, and yeah, that's looking pretty good. So I'm just going to hide the C styles again, and now I have my heading inside my section. I'm just going to copy this heading and paste it directly in here, and then also kind of just start comparing eye to eye. What do I see font size wise? I'll preview and say this heading probably needs to be a bit larger compared to that one, so I might increase the font size some. And for all the headings I'm using EMs, so that's just a percentage of the body. And I'll even reduce the letter spacing some to make, not quite that much, but basically to make all the letters a little bit tighter together. Somewhere in there looks alright. And then I'll reduce the line height to get these lines of text a little bit closer. Increase the spacing, the size some. And that looks pretty good for my heading size right there. Next up is I need some buttons, so I'll just drag in this button here, and I'll just give this a class of button. And from here I want to set the background color to be this blue, and I want to set the font weight to be bold, and then the paddings inside the buttons, I want to set those to EM as well. So basically nothing in the designer view should be pixel based. It should all be EM. And that's going to make things scale a lot smoother. So, and then also the border radius, these had some rounded corners slightly. So I want to make sure that that's EM as well. And I'll start off with, I don't know, 0.6 EM. Maybe back it down. No, that's probably all right. 0.6 EM. And then I can just click in to change the button text. And then I can right click on that and click duplicate to make the second one. And that one just says watch. So this one's a little different. It's a white one instead. So I'm going to just add a new tag behind here that says white, and now I can change the color of it without it changing the first one. And I can also change the font color as well to be dark. So now anything I change to this first one is going to change to the second one as well. But anyone I change on the second one will not change to the first one because it has this new tag added to it here. This sort of combo class is what it's called. So that is looking all right. So the next thing I need to do really is I want to make a background video in this hero section. So I'm going to go to the background video section, which is right here, and just drag it in right above this sort of section that I created. And believe it or not, I'm going to give this a class of section as well. Basically, every section on this page, I want it to have this section class, so that way it's using the exact same space on the sides of every section, and if I ever need to change it, it'll change for all of them. So this one has the section class, which means it has all the same padding that I want. I can just drop these elements into it. And then the only thing I'm going to do different to this background video section is I'm going to add a class that's called hero. And basically this hero class will allow me to change things about the section, this combo class, but not apply those changes to the section below, which is what we want. So the first thing I want this to do is really span 100% the height of the screen. So that way it starts at the top of your screen and it goes to the bottom. So I could just set this to 100 VH for the height, and that basically means that it's 100% the height of your screen. The problem is when the height of your screen gets smaller than the text inside it, that text is going to start to get cut off because you said set this div to 100% the height of the screen, and this is 100% of your height right now. So all this content is being cut because it's 100% the height of the screen. But what you can do instead is remove that. So if we click on height and click reset, we want to set the minimum height to 100 VH. And what that means is it's 100% the height of the screen. It stops, you see right there at the bottom of the screen. If your screen gets smaller than the content inside it, the content inside it's just going to push this section down some. But it's not gonna get any smaller than your content, but it's going to be at least 100% the height of your screen, which is good. That's exactly what we want. So the next thing we want to do is really just center this text from top to bottom inside this hero background. So I'm going to basically add a flex box here. And Flexbox allows you to align things. So right now we're aligning things horizontally. That means that every element inside this section is going to be aligned side by side. But instead, we want to align things vertically. That means that each item is going to stack one on top of the other. So I'll switch this from horizontal to vertical. And now you see it's all stacking one on top of the other. So we definitely want it to be aligned to the left. So for alignment, we'll hit start. But we want it to be justified towards the center. So we'll hit this next option. And that just puts it right there in the middle of the screen. Now we don't want these two to be underneath each other, so we're going to need to drag in another div, and we'll call this one button container. And basically we want to make sure that both of our buttons are inside this container. That way they're allowed to stack side by side again, which is exactly what we want. So that's looking good. I'm just going to go ahead and set this video, this background video. So I'm going to go over to the settings, click upload video, and then I'll navigate over here and just kind of upload this hero video right into the page. So while that's uploading, we can move on to our next section. And our next section is just basically going to be this 3-image section here. So I can use this one that we already have set up. And I'm going to create a container to hold all these 3 images. So we'll drag in a div, and I will call this div, we'll call it 3-column container. And the reason why I'm naming it something so vague instead of 3-photo container or something like that is because I plan to reuse this container here with the text as well. So this 3-column container is going to be applied anytime I have an instance of 3 items side by side. So we have the 3-column container set up. We have our background video. Let's go ahead and add our 3-column items. So I'm going to drag another div inside. And then this div is going to be called 3-column item. And this is going to be one of the 3 items inside this 3-column container. So we can set the width of this div. I'll set it to something around 30% per se. Doesn't have to be exactly. And then I need to basically drag some images in. So I'll upload all my images that we created for the site and just kind of let those import. And I'll grab the first image, which is this image right here. I want to drag it, if I'm going to go over to the navigator here, I want to drag it into this 3-column item. And then I'll give it a class. We need to give it a class of 3-column, let's say, photo. So we have a class of 3-column photo. We want to basically give it a size. So right now it's, let's say it's 30 viewport width and a height of 30 viewport width. And that's just going to maybe a little less, maybe 20 and 20. And that's just going to make it a perfect square. So I'm going to actually remove the, let's see. I'm going to remove the size on this 3-column item for now, this width, and just let the image define the size. So we got one item there. We're going to duplicate this and then duplicate it one more time so that we have 3 items. And so we have 3-column items, and then when we have a photo inside each one of those items, we're going to grab the 3-column container, go over to Flexbox, and apply a Flexbox, and this stacks them just like that, side by side, horizontally, which is good. But we want to, for justify, instead of aligning it to the left or to the right, we want to justify and space between, and it's the second from last option. And what that's going to do is it's just going to space them all out evenly, which is perfect. It's just what we want. So then I can grab each one of these items and just kind of increase the width some till I get it set to my liking. It has a good bit of space. So 25 seems pretty okay, 25 viewport width, and I'll set the height to be the same. You'll notice it's stretching the images because we define a width and a height. So set the fit right here to cover. And what that's going to do is it's going to crop the image on the sides or the top or bottom to make it fit inside that box without stretching it, which is exactly what we need. So I'll go over to this next image right here. It needs to be these. So I'll just click the setting gear and click replace. And I'll grab this one and then click the setting gear, replace again. And this time I'll grab that one. And then also I want these to have rounded corners. So under radius I'll do 0.6 EM again and just make sure we're doing EM. And that looks pretty good. That's that section right there. This background video, we're going to want to add some gradients because we want it to fade to black at the bottom. We want it to fade to black off to the side. So I'll have the background section selected right here. And I'm going to basically, under backgrounds, add a gradient. And for this gradient, I want the start color right here to be our black at 0% opacity. And then I want the stop color to be our black at 100% opacity. And I'm going to rotate this to 0 degrees so the black is at the bottom. Maybe this doesn't have to span the whole height. Like maybe this transparent could start right here. And I might add one more black a little bit higher. And I might darken that slightly just to make that fade a bit more gradual. So that looks good. And then I need to add one more gradient. This gradient we're going to add, again, it's going to be a fade from black at transparent. And it's going to end at just black at 100%. And this one we really just want to set to fade from left to right. Or I'm sorry, from right to left, so the black is on this side. And again, I don't need this to span the whole width, this transparent. It can stop somewhere around here maybe, and I'll add another one to just sort of darken things up a little, so that way we can see a little more of that text. So that's looking pretty good. We got the video back there, we have these images. Next thing I want to do is grab this button container right here, and I'm going to add a bit of padding to the actual container, so maybe 2 EM to get us started, and that way it just kind of pushes it off the text. It's not directly touching the text, which is good. So this one we also need a bit of space, so I'm going to add a space. I'm going to call this class first button, create a new class, and then the space will be 1 EM probably would be good. And that's just going to create a little bit of space right there, but because we added this class of first button, it's not creating the space here for the second button, which is good. So that is pretty much set up, and now we can go ahead and build the next section, which is this text and video side by side. So basically I'm going to duplicate this section that I have here, and I'm going to delete the 3-column container out of it, and I'll add in another container inside the second section, and this one's just going to be called a 2-column container. Alright, so we have our 2-column container. We'll drag in our 2-column items next. So this one will be so we'll have a 2-column item, and this is going to be, remember we said it's exactly 50% of its parent. So the width will be 50% of this 2-column item, and we can duplicate this to make 2 of them. And let's go ahead and drag in a video. So I'll drag in this video, and I'll put it inside the second one right here. And then inside that first 2-column item, we'll drag in a heading, and we'll put it right in there. And this heading is actually an H4 this time, so it's a little bit smaller. And then these 2 items are stacking one underneath the other. So we need to get the 2-column container and use Flexbox again. And with Flexbox, we can align this however we want, but I'm going to align it to the center, not to the top, not to the bottom, but to the center of each other. And then justify it. It doesn't matter in this case because they're both 50%, so they'll span the full width right there. So now we have our heading, we have our video. I'm going to give this video a class of video, and I will give it a radius of 0.6 em, so that way it has the rounded corners that we need. This one here, I can just copy some of this text and throw it in. That's looking good. The only problem is this text is getting a little too close to that video for comfort. So what I'm probably going to want to do is create another div. I'm going to put this div inside the 2-column item, and then I'll call this one something like 2 column item contain. So this is the container for the stuff inside the item, and I'll give this one a padding of, I don't know, maybe 4em or 3em, something like that. So we're using EMs and just giving it a little bit of padding so that it doesn't directly touch the side. So that's looking good there. I believe our next section is this fun one here. So this title is just going to kind of scale, kind of just rotate or move like that, one loop. And then we got our 3 column item again. So we'll go ahead and duplicate this section. And this time we will delete this 2 column container. And this time we need to drag another div in here, and we'll call this one moving text. So this is our moving text container, and we'll go ahead and drag in a heading. Doesn't really matter which one in this case for our purposes. And we'll just give it the title. So this is our text here. So we're going to need, inside this moving text, we're going to need a container that kind of holds all the pieces together. So I'll drag in another div and call this 2 column text container. So this container kind of holds everything, and I'll go ahead and drag that in. So this heading is going to need a class. We'll call it display text because it's super large. And also it's going to need a little line right here, a div. So we'll drag in a div. And then we'll call this one, we'll just call it moving text line. And then so the width of it could be anything, but I'll set it to ems. That way it scales with the font size. So maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 ems, and then the height of it could also be ems as well. That way, again, it all kind of just scales. So as we increase or decrease the font size, this line will decrease and increase. And then we need to give it a background color, so I'll set a background color of white, and then we create the line. So again, we want these to be side by side, so I'll grab the parent of these two, the moving line and the display text, which is, in this case, the container. We'll set it to flexbox, center, and align that way. And just like that, we have our line in our text. So this text, this line I might make slightly smaller, like slightly thinner, maybe 0.15 em for that. Might make it a little less wide as well. And then I'm definitely going to add some margin, which is space outside the container to both sides of it. That way it's not touching this text exactly. And what I'm going to want to do next is kind of duplicate this. So I'll copy the text and paste, and I'll copy the line, paste, so we have the text in the line, and then you'll see this text is being forced to stack, but we don't want it to do that. So I'll grab the display text class that we created, and under breaking I'll do no wrap, and that way it's just forced not to wrap whatsoever. Because this is in a flex box, our line is being squished to no width at all. It's like super small. So I'm going to give it a minimum width of 8 em, which is the same width we set. And that forces this text not to squish it anymore, but just to exceed outside of this boundary that we set, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. So that's all looking really good. I think for this to be a seamless loop, I'll set this to overflow scroll for a second so I can scroll inside this container so you can see what's happening. For this to be a seamless loop, we're going to need 4 of these boxes of text, so that way they can loop perfectly out of the way. Otherwise, this one would move right here, and then you would see that nothing's here, and it would cut back instantly here. So we're going to need a couple of these. I'm probably just going to make 4 inside, just so that it's a seamless loop. So what I'm going to do is grab this text, and paste it, grab the line, paste it inside this div, do that one more time. So we have the display text, the line, display text line, text line, text, and line. So four of them. That's perfect. So we have this. I'm going to set this, remove that overflow scroll now because we don't need it anymore. We have this set, but it's causing our page to scroll horizontally, which we do not want. We don't want the user to scroll. We want the excess to be cut off. So we'll actually just set the overflow to hidden, and that's going to remove all that excess. So now it's not scrolling whatsoever. Problem is, it's inside this section and it's not spanning the full width either. So we can set the width of this to be 100 viewport width, and that just means 100% the width of the screen. Now we have this problem of scrolling again because it's not starting right there. So we'll do, for margin, we'll do -10 viewport width, and that's just going to push it back to where it's starting right at the start of the screen, and now we don't have any scrolling whatsoever. And this section still has this padding, which is what we want. So that's looking really good. I think what I'm going to do is actually make this display text a lot larger. It should, ideally we should only be able to see a little bit of this W. So I'll just kind of increase the size a good bit. So that way we're seeing, yeah, a little bit of that W, and that's it. And I might make this like medium instead of super bold. That way it's not too wide. So that's looking pretty good. And I think what we can do now is go ahead and just start animating. So we're going to go over to the interactions panel. We're going to create a page trigger, and it's going to be on page load. So as soon as the page starts loading, we want something to happen. So when the page starts loading, we'll create an animation, and we'll call this one moving text. And what we want it to do is we want to move the container that all this text and these lines are in. So this container here. So we're going to start by moving it 0%, and that's going to take 0 seconds for the duration. And we want to apply this to the class. That way if we decide to reuse this section on other pages or even on this page, it'll still make this animation happen to all of them. Then we'll add another move. And this one's going to be something like -50%. So there we have this -50%. So it's moving halfway. Actually, what I think we need to do, let's close out of this animation for just a second. There's a couple things we need to do. First of all, this container here, let's remove that width and remove that overflow hidden and remove that margin. Instead, what we're going to do is set that on the moving text block itself. So the width will be, again, 100 viewport width. Overflow will be hidden, and it will have a negative margin of 10 viewport width. Now if we scroll, all that's there. It's looking good. So now we'll go back and let's set the overflow to hidden, and we'll go back and set up our animation. So I'm reopening that animation. This text is moving -50%, so it's moving it backwards. We really just want this next one to start where that one started, to end where that one started. So I'm just going to line these up until they look about right. So in this case, 90.5, let's see. 90.5 is probably good to get these two aligning in the exact same spot. And right now, if we play this, it's super quick. We want it to be a lot slower. So for the duration, I might make it something like 8 seconds, maybe even longer. Maybe we'll go 14 seconds. And yeah, that way it's just really subtle and it's just kind of moving. And one more thing, we want them to add another move that moves it back to where it started. So 0%, and set the duration to 0. So it starts at 0, it moves over to where this second text is in the right place, and then it ends at 0, and right there. And then we can check loop to make this repeat. And now if we preview this, we got our video, we got our images, and this is moving rather nicely. And it's once this text reaches right here, the corner, it's just going to repeat, but it'll do it so seamlessly. So yeah, it'll look like it's just perfectly seamless there. Let me grab a video real quick, just to kind of put in here in our video column. Let's grab a video.
In the card.
And I'm just going to set this video right now, add a URL. That way we have a little bit of something set there. So awesome. That is set up and it looks good. This is set up and it's working right. I think our next step is to have this sort of 3-column thing going on again. So for that, what we want to do is basically just copy this 3-column container that we already created, and we want to paste it inside this last section right underneath the moving text. So we have our 3 columns here again, and originally we set the width of this photo to 25 viewport width. Let's set the width of this column item to 25 viewport width as well. And now what we're going to do is just delete this photo out of the item, and we still have this item set to 25 viewport width. What we want to do is drag in a heading, and this one's going to be an H4, and I'll just grab the text from that, and then let's drag in a little bit of paragraph text inside this, and I'll just grab some text and put it in there. And then now basically what we can do is delete each of the photos and copy the text into those items. And I'll just go ahead and grab all that copy and throw it in here real quick. So you'll notice that the Webflow froze up on me for a second. I'll just reopen the project. So you'll notice that the text is supposed to be like a light gray, and it's actually a white. So we'll fix that in just a second. But first thing I'm going to do is just get all this plugged in. Alright, so what we want to do is grab the paragraph text, and we'll hit this plus sign, and we'll do all paragraphs. So every paragraph text on the page, we want to change the color to be this light gray color that we created earlier. So now any paragraph text we drag into the page is automatically going to be this light gray without us having to add any sort of class to it to make it look that way. So this whole item container, 3-item, I guess what we can do is add some to the moving text container. We can add some bottom margin of maybe 2 or 3 EM, just so that way it's not directly touching. And then here we're going to want to add a class to these items. We'll just call it to bottom margin. And we'll re-add that to each one of these titles and give it that class of 2 EM for the bottom margin. Actually, I might change that to 1 and rename this class to 1. So now in any instance that we want 1 EM of bottom margin, we can put it right there, and we can just add that class and it'll have that right there set for us. So that's looking pretty good. The next thing that we need is this sort of image and text combo. So we can actually reuse this section we already made here. I'm just going to right click on it and duplicate it. And then I'll open up my sections. I'm just going to collapse them all for now. I'll drag this one underneath the other one. And there we go. We have this sort of 2-column thing going on, which is good. So from there, what I want to do is actually switch the order of these items so that the video is here, and then the other items here. And you'll notice we have a little bit of padding on this container of 3em that was stopping it from touching the video here. So what we'll need to do is add a combo class to this container that is, we'll call it is inverted, and we're going to switch it, the 3em here, to be 3em on the other side instead. And now, now that is working, and that's working there, just as we would expect it to. So good. I'll just go ahead and throw in some other content right here. We also know that we're going to need sort of a button. So I'll just copy this one and paste it right here. Give it a plan visit. I don't need this combo class on this is first button because there's not two buttons side by side. So I'll just click on that drop down and click remove class. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, I might reduce the height of this because it's kind of large. So here, I want this space underneath. What I can do is just add that one bottom margin that I already created, and bam, right there. So it's really good to repeat these classes as much as possible. It just makes life a lot easier in the long run. So here we're supposed to have an image. So what I'm going to do is actually grab an image and drop it inside this item. And then from this item, we know that the image should be 50% of the parent, but in this particular case, it's really 50% of the entire screen because it kind of bleeds off to the edge of the screen here. So I will just call this wide image. And for the width of it, we'll set it to 50 viewport width. 50% the width of the screen, and you'll see it's actually not getting any wider than this title here. That's because it has a max width of 100%. So we can click on that percent and set it to none. So now it has a max width of none. It doesn't have a max width, and it's 50% the width of the screen, which is good, but it's overlapping the text some. So for margin, we'll add a negative margin of 10 viewport width, and that's just going to push it all the way off to the edge of the screen. And I can delete this video now. We don't need the video anymore. So that's perfect. It's all the way off to the edge of the screen. And the reason why we're using 10 is because our section has 10 padding. So we're just pushing it back to where it started. So I'll go ahead and grab the image that I want to appear here, which is this image here. And then I'll set a height of it too. So maybe the height, I'm going to use viewport width as well. So it kind of just scales like a unit. Maybe the height can be 36 viewport width, and again set the fit of it to cover, that way it doesn't stretch the image. And I want the corners to be rounded just on these two sides. So under border radius, I'll click on this individual corners option to see more advanced options, and I'll do 0.6em here and 0.6em for this corner as well. So these two corners are rounded, and that is looking pretty good. Yep, that's pretty much what I would expect there. So that's all working. That's looking all right. I guess our next section really is this section here. So I'll again go ahead and duplicate to create a new section. I'm going to delete this two items container, and then we'll just say we'll drag in a div inside this section. We'll call it CTA for call to action card, CTA card. And we'll give it a background color of blue. And then we'll give it some border radius of 0.6em to round the corners. And then we need to give it some padding because we don't want the text to be touching the side. So I'll do em in this case for padding. Let's do 3em. And if you hold shift and drag, it's going to adjust all sides simultaneously. So that's looking pretty good. This is supposed to be an H2, and I believe right under it is a H5. Oops. Wait, yeah, that's right. So I'm just going to go ahead and set that. So here we'll go ahead and set that, and then we'll set the text here. And then we need to add just kind of a button here. And let's just add the class we already created of white to make that one white. and then we'll set the text here. So that's looking all right. Let's go ahead and kind of get this set up the way we want it. So we need this to be on that side, this to be on the right side. So we should probably group the text together. So I'll drag in a div, and I'll call this CTA text for the class, and then I'll drag in all the text. So now the text is in a div, the button's in a separate div. I can grab the card and apply flexbox and center align it, not top, not bottom, but center, and then justify it with the space between option to space them out like that. And that's looking pretty good there. And I may, depending on who I'm giving this to, say I give this to a client to use, and they decide to make this heading a lot longer, kind of gets a little too long there. So I may set the button, I may do something on all my button classes where it says breaking equals no wrap. That way it can't break there, but this text is getting a little too close, so I can get this CTA text container class that I created, and I can add a little bit of padding inside it, so that way it doesn't actually touch. So you just think of things like that as you're building different things that you may need to add more to. And also we need a little bit of spacing underneath here, so I might just throw on that exact one bottom margin class. That one's a little too much margin, I would say, so maybe we'll duplicate this class and we'll call it maybe 0.2 bottom margin, something like that. And then we'll just make this 0.2. That way it's a little closer. So yeah, that's looking pretty good. And from here I can even, if I wanted to, increase the padding a little bit on top or bottom or however, but that looks all right there. The last bit that we really need is the footer. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a footer. We're going to duplicate this section, and we're going to add a class to this section called footer. That way we can change the background color of it to more of this dark gray without it changing the background color of all our sections. And you'll notice another thing too, is this section had 3 viewport or the 3 EM padding, and this one had 3 EM, and that was creating that nice even amount of space between all the sections because they had the same amount of padding, top and bottom. When we get to this footer, it's pretty obvious that this, because of the background color change, this isn't 3 EM anymore. So what we can do is add some margin of 3 EM instead, and that's just going to push this down to where we have the same amount of space between the top and the bottom. So that's looking good there. I think the next thing we need to do is kind of build out the footer right here. So I'll go ahead and add a div just to contain, it's going to contain all this information here. So I'll drop in a paragraph, and then so this is the paragraph font size. We want it to be, but we want it to be bold, and we want it to be white. So I'll say, I'll call this, add a class called bold, and I'll make it bold, I'll make it white, and then I'll change the text inside it. So we have this, and then I'll duplicate that paragraph, and for the second one I want to remove that bold class that I assigned, and from here it's really just a matter of pasting in information. Alright, that's looking pretty good. This bold, I may even add like some bottom margin so it's not touching the two blocks of text. That's looking alright. We'll grab this entire div block, which I just realized we didn't give it a name. We'll call it footer column. And then we'll duplicate the footer column for the next group. And we'll duplicate it again for the next group. So we got 3 of them stacked side by side. we really have two pieces to the footer. We have the footer top and we have the footer bottom. So two separate pieces. So what I should probably do is drag in a div into the footer, and I'll call this one footer top. And then inside the footer top, we want all of the three columns that we just created. And inside those three columns, or for the footer top, we're going to flex and align it. Sure, it can stretch the whole height of each other, and then space evenly. So that way it just spaces them like that, evenly between the two. So then for here, I can drop in contact, and I can drop in all this information, our phone number, our email, maybe a link to contact us, and then here, definitely our address would be something. Okay, so that's looking pretty good for footer top. I'll kind of want one more column in here. So let's duplicate this footer column. And this one's going to be for social media. So I'll delete the text out of it. We got this footer column for our social links. I'm basically going to drag our social links. So we'll need link blocks actually. So let me delete that. We'll need a link block, and that way the social icon is actually clickable. It can go somewhere. So like facebook.com, for instance. And we'd open that in a new tab. So then we'll call this link block, we'll call it footer social link. And then add in an image, and I'll drag in the Facebook icon inside the social link. We'll call this, give this a class of footer icon, and then give it a size. So maybe I'll set the width of it to be 2 EM, something like that. Maybe a little smaller because that is kind of large. So the width of that is set, and then I'll just go to the link block and duplicate that. I believe I have 4 social links, so I'll duplicate that 4 times. So that's looking pretty good. Let's change the this to the next one, this image. Just going to replace with YouTube, replace with Instagram, and replace with Twitter. So the width of Facebook is, the width of them all are set to 0.9. Let's try this. Let's remove the width, and let's set the height to 0.9 instead, or maybe a little larger. Yeah, that way they're all the same height. That looks a little better. And then one more thing that we'll want to do inside the footer link block, we'll want to add a little bit of padding, maybe 2 EM, maybe a little less. That way we just kind of space them all out. And I mean, they look pretty much okay. Facebook looks a little smaller because it's not as wide, and then YouTube looks huge because it's a lot wider. So if you wanted to make these a little more proportionate, you could set them all to have the same width and height. Like say maybe they're all 1.5 M, and set the fit of it to contain. So it just forces that image to contain inside the block. And that looks a little bit more proportionate. This footer column, they're being set to, basically these are anchored to the top, and we want them to be anchored to the bottom. So I'll add a combo class and call this one social. And then in this combo class, we're going to add some flex box that kind of just snaps them all right down to the bottom. And that looks pretty good. So that's everything for the top of the footer. Let's drag in another div inside the footer, and we're just going to call this footer bottom. And from here, we're going to want this line, so we can add a border. And I'll just add it to the top by selecting the top here, and I'll do 0.2 EM for now, and maybe make it this grayish color. And then I'll add some padding inside this footer bottom, so maybe 1 EM top and bottom for now. And then in here we just have the copyright, so I'll grab this text. This would be a little bit of paragraph text. So I'll drop in some paragraph text there. Maybe duplicate this text so we can have these sort of links, like terms and conditions, for instance, would be a link. Let's see, another link would be privacy policy. And really, if these are links, we want them to be clickable. So I would actually use the text link option here instead for these. So I'll just put that in there, duplicate that, and then make that one the terms and conditions. All right, so we have those set. One thing we should notice about everything in the footer bottom is it's white and it's a little bit smaller than our regular paragraph text. So what I can do for that is I can just call this footer bottom text, and I'll just assign that class to everything that's in the bottom. And then what we'll do is we'll set the font size. Right now it's set to viewport width. That's because it's being inherited from the body. Instead, we'll set it to ems, so 1 EM for instance, maybe a little less than 1 EM. And that's just a percentage of the body, so once the font size gets set to pixels on mobile, this is a pixel font size, this is going to be a percentage of 16 pixels. So that way we don't have to reset this font size on mobile. It's just going to scale down based off the size of our regular paragraph text, which is good. And then we can set the color of it to white. And that's pretty good. I think one more thing we'll want to do is add flex to the footer bottom to center align everything, and then space evenly. And then these two are really supposed to be grouped together. It's not supposed to be spaced that far, so we'll need a div in here, and we'll call this footer links. And then in that div, we'll grab these footer links, and then on this one we'll probably add maybe a combo class of last link, so that way we can add a little bit of margin right there to kind of space them out so they're not touching each other. And I might remove I might make this a little smaller too, this border, and maybe a little bit more padding. And then we can add some margin off the top, so that way it's kind of spaced out there. This bottom padding on the footer, I'll probably remove altogether, so that way it's even space in between footer bottom. And then I might add more padding, like 5 would be good here. And so that this and this is an even amount of space, maybe I'll make this 5 as well. So we got 5 and 5, and then here we got the 2, a little over 2 and 2 for those. And yeah, that might make this a little larger. The life of a designer, always tweaking. So that's pretty good, I think, for our footer. Yeah, so that's how you would build that part. I think the last part we have to build is just the navbar, and Webflow has its own like sort of built-in navbar, but it does have some problems with it. It comes with some basic like default stylings, like extra paddings on this breakpoint you don't need. It doesn't allow you to apply flexbox to certain elements. It's kind of problematic, so I like to always just build my own navbar, and I find that's usually the best anyway. So if you just drag in a div block, we'll paste this div block up at the top, and I think we're done with the C styles div now. I'll just delete it. We're pretty much done with all those styles. So this one we're just going to call navbar, this div. And this is the only div you'll notice that is in a C section. And the reason for that is because it's the only div that doesn't respect the same amount of space on the page. So that's why we're making it its own thing instead of adding a combo class. So inside C section, we're going to need a logo, and this logo needs to be clickable. It needs to take you to the home page. So we're going to drag a link block in first, and we'll call this navbar-logo, and then we'll add in an image inside that link block, which is the actual logo. We'll call this navbar-logo image. And we'll set the width of it to maybe like, I don't know, 5M, somewhere in there. And then we'll grab the navbar itself and we'll add a little bit of padding on the sides. And a little bit of padding on the top and bottom too. Not that much for sure. But yeah, we definitely want some padding on sides, one top and one bottom. So that is looking pretty okay there, I would say. The next thing we're going to need is basically a div for all our menu links. So on mobile, this will probably be hidden. There'll be a hamburger icon, and when you click, it'll show this div, but on desktop, this div will be kind of fully visible. So we're going to drag in a div, and we'll call this navbar menu. And this is where all our menu links will go. So from here, I'll probably drag in a link block. I'll call this navbar link. And then I'll just drop in some text inside of it and kind of give this text whatever I want it to say. Yeah, something like that. So I'll grab the navbar and I'll apply flexbox to it, center align it, and then distribute for the justify, just space evenly. So that way this whole nav menu is all the way on this side, the logo's on that side, and that's looking pretty good. Next thing I'll do is just duplicate this nav link quite a few times to make a few links. And what I'll probably want to do for this nav link is first of all add some padding on the sides. So let's do there, and let's add some padding on top and bottom, maybe not a lot, but just a little bit there. And then I'll just kind of fill out the text of these different links. So that's them. I'll grab the nav link class, so the link block that the text is inside, and I'll start applying some styles to it, like all caps, for instance. And you'll see it's kind of affecting all the text inside it. And then I'll add some letter spacing, so maybe M's. Maybe I'll decrease the with using M's, decrease the font size a little bit. I think this is medium for the font size or the font weight, so maybe making that a little heavier wouldn't be bad. And then the last thing is I need the button inside of, not inside the nav link, but inside the nav menu. So it's right there. We can remove this is first button class. We'll create a new class and we'll call this nav link. Well, actually nav button. And then what I'll do is actually make the font size a little bit smaller. And the beauty about this is because we're using M's for the padding, you'll see the space around the outsides of the button grows and shrinks with the font size of the button. So that scales really, really nicely. So we can make this a little smaller and the whole thing scales without us having to really adjust much. For margin, I'll add a little bit of margin right here just to get that text to where it's not so close, it's not touching. And that is looking pretty good for the nav. One more thing we need to do is set this nav to fixed, so it's always at the top of the screen. So for position, we'll do fixed, and we'll set it to span the whole top right there. And you'll see it's also below the video, which we don't want. We want it to be higher. So z-index is like layers. It's like whatever has the higher number is going to be on top of everything else. So if I set this to like 2000 and hit enter, it's automatically going to be on top of everything because it's the highest. I'll also give this a background color. Just a dark black would be good. And that's looking great. So that is the nav bar. I guess what we need next is to add the hamburger icon that will click to open the nav when it's on mobile. So we want to drag in another div. And then this div is going to go in here. It's going to, so in the nav bar, you'll have the nav logo, you'll have the nav bar icon, and then you'll have the nav bar menu. The nav bar icon, and let's actually make this a link block so we can click on it. So I'll right click on this div and convert it to a div block. So now it's clickable. The nav bar icon itself, we really just can hide for now. We don't need it till it's on till the mobile version. So I'll just hide this for now. Set display none. And yeah, so that is desktop version, I believe, of everything. Maybe we can make a couple little tweaks. Like if we grab the nav bar, we can under tags just tag it as a nav. And then maybe we'll come over here and under the footer, we'll just tag this as a footer. And that's looking pretty good. That way, it's just better. And we might want to even just add some hover states, like on our buttons, for instance. If we go over to this button class and we go over to hover, we can maybe add a background color of black on hover, but turn the opacity down so it just darkens whatever the current color is a little. So now because we added it to this button class, that's going to happen on this one, it's going to happen on the small one, it's going to happen on the white one, it'll happen on all of the classes, which it's going to happen there. Perfect. So it's just scaling everywhere. And you'll notice it just kind of snaps to that darker color. We want it to fade. So you can add a transition. And for now, we'll apply this transitions to all properties, and it's just going to ease it. So now it should be a smooth, like a smooth fade to anything that we do. We can also on hover, maybe we want to do a transform and just kind of scale it. Maybe we'll scale it down slightly, like 0.98, ever so slight. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, so it's very, very subtle. It's just like whenever you hover over one of these, it just kind of darkens and scales down ever so slightly. One thing to keep in mind is on tablet, you really want to, on the tablet view, remove all your hover states. So go back to hover, set the scale back to 1, and set the transparency all the way to 0. Just because there are no hover states on tablet, and if someone, oops, didn't mean to set that. If someone clicks on this, it may turn black and scale down really quickly before it brings them to the next page. So it feels kind of buggy. So it's a good practice to just reset your hover states to what they were on tablet. Just kind of clear them out. So now let's go about making this all responsive. And because we set this up so clean, responsiveness is just going to be super, super fast. Because this is just set up with repeatable classes. Everything we do to one happens to the others. So it's really nice. So what I like to do is actually grab the hamburger icon that I want to hide all this behind. And there's two options. You can search Lottie files or also lottieflow.com. Both have really, really great options for hamburger icons. So my personal favorite is LottieFlow just because they're cleaner. There's less space around the icon, unnecessary space, and it's easier to change the colors. And there's a ton to choose from. So if we want it to transform from X, hamburger to X, I might use, that one's kind of cool. That one's just super clean and cool. This one, I don't know what's going on. So maybe we'll use this one for now. So I know for sure that it needs to be white. So I'll just type in that color to get it to be white. Then I'll download it, and then we'll go back over to Webflow, and under images we'll just upload, and from my downloads folder I'll grab that Lottie file, and there, that's our Lottie. So from here I'm just going to grab this and I'm going to drag it inside the navbar icon div that we created, and I'll call this navbar icon Lottie. And all right, basically what we want to do for now is we'll grab this whole nav menu and we'll set it to display none to hide it completely. We'll grab the navbar icon, set it to display block to be able to show it, and we obviously need to set the width on this icon Lottie, maybe 2 em, something a bit smaller so that way it's not like huge. Actually, I might set the width instead on the navbar icon div itself. It looks like either way there's a little bit of space there, so I'll set flexbox to kind of center that Lottie inside its parent. And that is looking pretty good. So that's our icon. We need to design how the menu is going to look now. So if we go over to the menu, set it back to display block, we'll notice it's still inside the nav, and we really want it to be outside the nav altogether. So I'll set it to position absolute, and I'll set it to the top of the screen, and you'll see now it's all the way at the very top. It's ripped out of the document flow. We want this one to be like just full height. So I'll set the height of it to 100 VH, 100% the height of the screen. And I'll give the nav menu on this breakpoint, I'll give it a background color that is that sort of light gray color. And then another thing, I'll set the z-index to -1, so that's -1. It means it's right behind the icons. That way we can still click on these icons. And then the sort of menu, we can apply a flex to it that aligns it vertically, so one stacks underneath the other. And we can center everything up so everything's nice and centered. We can remove this on the nav button, we can remove this margin so that way it's centered there. Maybe even this about, we can try a couple things with it. Let's try spanning it, this nav link 100% width. So that's looking kind of nice there. Let's add a little bit of padding inside the nav menu so it's not touching. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that way it's not touching the sides. Maybe we can add a bottom border to this nav link. So 0.2 em or something like that. 0.2, and then we can add some padding. Maybe we will increase the font size slightly, make it a little larger, a little easier for fingers to quickly touch on a small phone when navigating. And then maybe this button here can be full, like 100% width. One thing I noticed is the text align should have been centered on all our buttons in case we ever decided to use it 100% width. So I'm going to go back to desktop real quick and grab this button and do text align center just to make sure all our buttons have text align center. Now this one, what we can do is give it some top margin. That way it's not touching that line. Maybe give it a little bit more padding to make it a little thicker. And that's not looking bad. I might even add some more padding here, kind of maybe even align it there. Maybe even make the font size a little larger on this button on mobile. And then I can reduce some of this padding slightly. Just playing with it, just trying different things, seeing what works, what doesn't, how we can make this look as good as possible. So I think that's okay there for our menu. That looks all right. It'll just keep getting smaller, and even at really small sizes, it works pretty well. So I think we're good. We have a menu. So what I want to do now is set the height of it to 0. That way it's just kind of like at the top of the screen. And I'll also want to Let me remove this top and bottom padding so that way it actually is 0. So it's right there at the top, it's 0. I'll set the overflow to hidden so it cuts everything that's hanging off the outside. Like you can see this button is kind of hanging off the outside of that div. So set the overflow to hidden and it just kind of crops everything off the outside. So yeah, that is great. The nav menu's up at the top, it's 0 height, and it's the overflow's hidden. Now what we can do is we want, anytime we click on this icon, we want to open the menu. So I'll grab the navbar icon div we created, and under the element trigger, we'll create a new trigger, and it'll be on click or tap, and we'll apply this to the class, so it applies on every page. So on the first click, we want to create an animation, and this animation is going to be called Open Nav. So when that click happens, the first thing we want to do is grab the nav icon Lottie and add an interaction of Lottie. So it's going to start at 0% and the duration will be 0. Then we'll create a new Lottie that takes this timeline, drags it out to when this first becomes an X, and maybe the duration. Yeah, it looks like maybe this particular Lottie doesn't actually start at 0. It looks like it officially starts somewhere around 16%. So it goes from 16% to 29% to make that X. That's perfect. And then let's grab the nav menu. And what we want to do here is set a size. So the width is going to be 100 viewport width. The height will be 0 viewport height. And the duration will be 0. That's how we want it to start. But we'll create a second size with the second Lottie, where the width is also 100 viewport width. The height is 100 viewport height, like that. And we'll play this out. So you see the X, the hamburger icon turns to an X, and the sort of menu just slides out, which is what we want. We can also set some easing on this to make it a little smoother. So like out quart is a nice one. It gives it a little bit smoother of an action, and we can make it a little longer, like 0.8 maybe. And so it's nice and smooth. It's just sliding out whenever we click. So that's perfect. We can hit done. Now on second click of this, we want something else to happen. We'll create a new animation. This one will be called Close Nav. And then here, we want to grab this Lottie icon. We'll add a Lottie trigger here. We want to change this, reset it back to 16%, which is where it started. That's where it was with the hamburger icon. And then we'll want to grab the nav menu and add a size interaction. Width would be 100 viewport width. Height would be 0 viewport height to return it back to its 0 state. We can select both of these and we can make them a duration of 0.8 and an easing of out quart, just to return this back to where it started and give it the same duration and easing as the in one. So let's just test this out and see what happens. So let's preview. We see it's a hamburger icon. We click, it turns to an X, the menu slides out. We click again, turns back to a hamburger, and the menu slides up. So, and we can just keep doing that endlessly. So you can take this as far as you want. You could animate each one of these nav links to fade in one after the other. Maybe have the button fade up, like from a 0 opacity to 100, or scale up. You can make anything you want happen when this nav opens. So it's really nice. So yeah, that's the nav menu. That's fully set up. It looks great on all breakpoints. We have our nav. I'm noticing, okay, yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, looks good. All right, so from here, we really just need to adjust any last minute things we need to change. Like this is all looking good. This 3-column grid here, it's still looking good here with 3 columns. Honestly, on tablet, you might not have to change much. Like this looks pretty good, I would say. This line height is a little, like I would like this to be closer. So I'll go back to desktop and I'll click these 2 selectors and select all H2 headings. And for line height, I'll reduce that to like 0.1 maybe to get those lines a little closer. And that looks a little bit better. Yeah. So that's looking pretty good. This footer is kind of rough, honestly. We might need to change, we might need to make things stack on this footer because it's a little too close. So for footer top, what I'll do is just switch it to block. And now all those are stacking one under the other. And then I'll grab each footer column and then just add a little bit of bottom margin to it. And that's pretty good. Social links, maybe now we can left align, might be good. And maybe we can grab each one of these social links and remove the padding from this side and add it to the other side. That way this starts right where we want it to start. That looks good. This last column here, we created a combo class of social for it. We don't need all this extra space on this last column, so we'll set that to 0. And that should clear out some of that extra space for us. So yeah, that looks good. And I believe everything looks all right here, honestly. It's scaling. We might want to make this a little smaller. So maybe I'll decrease the size of this to where, again, we can see a little bit of that W. And because it's %, we set up this interaction to move this div a %. It's going to still loop seamlessly even though we're decreasing the font size. It's going to loop in the exact same place. So right when this sits here, it was a little bit of a jump. So I may need to fine tune that interaction some, but it's pretty close. So here, once we move to the next breakpoint, this is where we really probably want to start stacking things. This space is getting a little too tight. So I might set this to display to Flexbox vertical to where it stacks one under the other now. And we probably want the image or video to be first and the text to be second. So we can use this switch order, reverse, and now it kind of reverses the order for us, which is great. We'll want the item, the 2-column item, to be 100% width of its parent now, not 50% width. So that's pretty good. And then one more thing is we'll want this sort of item container. We don't need this extra space anymore right there, but we can add some padding to the top. That way it's not directly touching its parent there. So that looks pretty good. Let's see, this one here, we're running into a bit of an issue. So again, we want the image to be above the text. So we'll grab this whole sort of 2-column container, and we'll add a combo class of flip on mobile, maybe. And we'll just kind of flip this. So yeah, now the image is first, text is second. We still have this padding on the top that we added above. And then here, this is still 10 viewport width. So this would be 90 all the way up into here. So this image should, instead of be 50, now it should be 90 viewport width. And it ends right where we want it to end, right on that. And then we can increase the height of it some. That way it's not too small. But yeah, that's looking good. Here we're running into a bit of an issue. I would say here it would be good to just center align everything. So we'll switch the Flexbox to vertical, center, and on the C card we'll kind of just do text align center. This button is fine. Let's see. It might be, this CTA text has a bit of padding that we need to remove. And what we can do instead is add padding on the bottom. That way it kind of keeps it away from the button. And maybe I'll reduce this slightly so it's not tremendously huge. All this is still looking pretty good. Yeah, I think that's okay. So that is looking fine. This might be getting a little tight, but I'm actually just going to wait to switch it. It is a little tight, but I'll wait. So here, this is where I definitely want to switch it. So I will grab this container and set it to vertical, and I'll set each one of these sort of 3-column items to 100% width, and then I'll set each of them to have a bottom margin of 2 EM. And the great thing is, because I did that to this 3-column item here, it also does it to this 3-column item here. The only thing I need to do is make sure that I set the width of the actual image inside that item to 90 viewport width, and the height to 90 viewport width as well. That way it's a perfect square again. So that is looking good. Maybe this heading, we can do all H1 headings and maybe even reduce the font size slightly. It is a little large. Actually, it might be okay, because yeah, I might want to actually scale this viewport width just on this one breakpoint for the heading. So that way it kind of just grows and shrinks with the size of the actual browser. And then I'm noticing too this issue we're having. So maybe this first button will also need some bottom margin on mobile. Yeah, that way when this stacks, it's fine. So that's looking pretty good there, I would say. This is all fine. This is all good. Here, this is good. This I might want to reduce the font size of slightly. Yeah, and this is good. Here we're having a bit of an issue, but because this is actually that must have started happening here. Because this is a combo class of is inverted, we can just remove this padding there. Yeah. So that's looking pretty good. We're fine there. We're fine here. Here we're going to need to start stacking things, so I'll switch this to vertical. And maybe I might just text align center everything in this section on here, just to keep it nice and spaced out. And then these footer links block that I created, I might add just some padding to it. Maybe not that much, just to keep it kind of spaced away. And honestly, copyright usually goes at the bottom of the screen, so I can grab this whole footer bottom and just reverse the order to make the copyright be first, which means I don't need this padding at the top, I need this padding at the bottom. Yeah, that looks pretty good, I would say. So that's everything for making it responsive across all breakpoints. The site, because we're using percentages and M's and everything, it's going to look the exact same on a 5K screen as it does on just a 13-inch MacBook. It's all scaling kind of just proportionately. And because we're using repeatable classes for all these sections, if we decide to come over here and just kind of reduce the space between a section, it's going to reduce the space for all of those sections on that page. So it makes making changes a lot faster, a lot easier. And it makes making things responsive a lot easier too, because we're reusing classes wherever we can. And then even animating this further wouldn't be an issue, like maybe making a hover state on some of these that just kind of reduce the opacity when you hover over it. And because they're all using the same class, that one change applies to all of them. So yeah, it definitely kind of makes things a lot smoother, making a completely responsive page. The last thing I would recommend doing is creating a symbol for your navbar and your footer. So go to the symbols panel with the navbar selected, call it nav and hit create. And then again, for the footer, select the entire footer, go to the symbols, and call this footer, hit create. And that basically is going to make this a symbol to where it's reusable. You can use this on other pages. Any change you make to one of them will change on just everywhere. So yeah, That's everything for building out going from design to development and building out a completely responsive site in Webflow.